aspect which I call as tuning the clock. And first one is, I call it a real-time exercise as an introduction to experiencing spontaneity. Now, for example, the note is going on here. Each one of us is going to sing the but only when an impulse comes from within, and you will stop the note only when the impulse says stop. But it must be very pure impulse, direct impulse from here. None of your memory, none of the people watching you, nothing is going to be playing a role. Like for example, I'll do it myself. As I my breath is finished, and I sing the second one, my impulse to stop has still not come. So my mind continues flowing on that. Or the sound will not be there because the breath is over. Please try this. I mean, individually it's all going to be unsynchronized or synchronized. It may appear to be synchronized at some times, some points of time. But try it. It's a very random thing. Please try. But when you feel like starting, and stop when you're told to stop from within. Sometimes it can be an absurdly short moment also, sometimes very long. As I said, the breath finishes, but mind continues because mind is still on that impulse. And then comes to a halt. Then you sing the next one. Please try. It's coming very well. Occasionally you might find that the breath has finished and you are still on that journey. Sometimes it can be very long. The journey can go very long because the impulse is still on. That brings you in direct I mean, whether it's the long or the short, it brings you very close, rather too close to your impulse within. And that bridging the distances between the source of the impulse and our actions. This is what is the first step towards real-time spontaneity. Now we are using just a single note. For the sake of practice, what I do is to sometimes, if we are practicing in one particular raga or a scale, you will practice the series, but each note will start only when the impulse comes, then the next note. And then we disassemble the sequence, then the impulse tells me to sing any note from the scale, and can be any octave as much as within physically possible sounds. And then after doing that for some time, that all the same, each note starts and ends at the pure impulse. After that stage, a time comes when the impulse asks me to step out of the scale. Not necessarily all the time out. I can drop into the scale, I can step out, I can drop in, use any note, random notes. But the impulse wishes for those notes to come. Now, once on the first few sessions when you practice, it might be very interesting, it might create a lot of energy. Sometime later on, you have to be careful because there can be a simulated real-time effect. You might feel that you are actually following your impulse, but you may not be following your impulse. Because we are waiting for the triggers and we are getting used to the trigger, then we say, okay, I think there's a trigger, I start now. But that, after some time, what happens, certain habits form, even without impulse. So those you have to be a little bit watchful, and we find that if we are very clear, then the impulse cannot impersonate itself. The real impulse cannot impersonate itself. The mind can impersonate a real impulse, but the real impulse cannot duplicate itself. So, you have to really wait for the sound to come, order to come. And sometimes there may be no order to come, nothing to sing. But stay in that state, that there is no order now. I have to be prepared for the second when the order comes. So even in a non-sounded state, I have to be ready for the next impulse to come. This phenomena really takes us to understanding our own state of being, and then when we go into music, writing, making, teaching, performing, gradually these start manifesting themselves in the presence of others. And those moments are very, very, really I'm telling from direct experience, that are very powerful to me as the player, as the singer, as the thinker, as the imaginator or the composer. Very powerful because it is so true that it gives me the freedom not to wait for anybody's approval. I don't need anybody's approval because I know it's the truth for me at that time. Invariably, when I'm performing with that kind of purity of impulse on stage, from experience I'm saying, it connects to the people just like that, because I guess there's some kind of, we are all related, entire universe, we are all related to each other in terms of energy fields, molecules, everything. So if one molecule tends to know itself, that knowingness does immediately has a resonance. Like if you feel that you're knowing yourself at this moment, it will immediately have an effect on me, because energy gets transferred to me and vice versa. So I have seen great masters when they perform. Sometimes there are silences which come in their playing. Sometimes they play a phrase, and those they are totally in each starting of a stroke, the slide they take and the ending of the stroke and the next stroke, every bit is very, very honest to themselves. And those masters, when they perform, something happens to the audience, if it's 2,000, 3,000 audience, they are all becoming one being, one element, you know. It does lead to a state of what we call high in that sense. But it's very intense, and the artist, you can imagine how many hours of build-up of stamina, emotional stamina, aesthetic stamina, spiritual stamina, intellectual stamina he has to build up to be able to hold. Even when we try ourselves, you'll see that even for 2 minutes to do something very original is very heavy, very taxing. Then when you elongate the periods to half an hour, to an hour and more, thinking on a topic, looking at the real impulse, it develops such a resilience to outside influences. That means outside influences which are coming with the reward of approval or disapproval, is the tag of that. That's what I call outside influences. Any influence which does not come with the approval or disapproval is not an outside influence. You get me? So the idea of freeing ourselves from my own milieu, I am from India, I am from West. I enjoyed symphony music as a kid because I didn't learn. My father he was a great tabla player, but he studied Western classical music, and every day afternoon we used to have 1 hour of Western classical music on the radio, and it was compulsory during lunch to listen to that music, you know. So I grew up with those kind of influences, other cultures. But the moment you see a traditional culture, because life is very social, we are very glued to each other in different intensities. So social approval becomes a very, very almost immediate burden. To free ourselves from that glue is a hell of a job, you know. What we have in the West, without the glue, but still the idea of approval still exists from our own milieu, from our teachers, from our students, from our friends, from enemies, from rivals. Everywhere there's some kind of certification going on. Huge traffic of certification that goes on. So this, when I fell into this, shall I say, into this big hole of real time, it was an accident that happened in 91 sometime. I just fell into that, you know. And then I realized that so many ghosts were sitting inside me, of my elders, my masters, my friends, so many. And I started practicing in real time. And one by one, they all pop out, you know. Hey, you are there. You are there. I didn't know you were staying inside me. We are carrying all of them with us, you know. So it then gradually, it took time. Gradually, it made me fearless. While my learning of the traditional material continued. But it was with a different view that I am going to learn the traditional ragas, the repertory and all that, trying to discover where was the real-time impulse in the composer to make that composition. Did he make it out of social compulsion or out of habit, or was it a genuine inspiration? We can only surmise, we cannot assure that we'll come to a very true answer because the composer is dead more than 100 years ago, you know. But it is possible to find out and relate ourselves to that composition and find, can that composition be part of my impulse? So I absorb that composition into myself and ask my impulse, please sing it for me. How do I sing it? So there the composition begins to become real to me than plucking out from memory and singing. It is embedded in memory, but gradually it is disassembled and reassembled by my impulse. And the song begins to unravel itself, the beautiful spots which may not have come down through the master-disciple chain, they begin to emerge, or maybe my own creativity begins to emerge in those circumstances, and the composition gradually it comes to a state where I feel it is authentically my composition. All the time we composed 200 years ago. The authenticity comes to this rendition of the composition because I have made it into my impulse in playing that or singing. We had a great master of the tabla, the percussion instrument. His name was, he was popularly known as Thirakwa. Ustad means maestro, Ahmad Jan Thirakwa. He lived till 95 or 96 and played till the end of his life full concerts, tabla solos and accompaniments also. Strangely, in his life he had hardly I think maximum 1 or 2 compositions in his life he made. Rest all was the tons of material he had learned from his so many masters. But he had assembled them so much, assimilated them so much and made it into his, that today many of the things which he plays, which he played, the recordings, people say, oh, this is Thirakwa's composition. Oh, that is Thirakwa. No, it's not his. And I tell the people, it's not, I tell the old people who say, this is Thirakwa's. No, it's not Thirakwa. He has made only 2 pieces. So he has made it so authentic to himself from getting into the soul of that piece and connecting that with his impulse, that it becomes his. There's no question of legal authorization and all that. It's purely an artistic experience to feel that. And why I'm bringing up this point is that on stage or even when practicing by ourselves or composing, we have our, now I'm sliding into the topic of tuning the clock. We have our own clocks within us. Each of us has many different clocks, and different times of the day there are different clocks which are functioning. The aggregate of the clock at different times of the day is different. In the morning it's different, semi-morning is different, early afternoon is different. But if we are watchful, we'll know what is our pace. And then there are days when you just go to some meeting or something, or meet somebody, and things start clicking. Oh yeah, man, yeah, that's it, I give you the number. Call, let's talk to that person, the job is done. It just works out. Then those clocks and the third person's clock also happen to be at the same time, the same junction. And there are days when with the best of intentions, nothing works out. So how do you judge that? I'll say my intentions were very clean, very pure, and why the job was not done. It's not that, it's a question of clock. So in music, when we perform, like taking a phrase, I've learned those thousands of phrases, thousands of compositions, but when I'm going to play the phrase authentically from my original impulse, I have to know what is my clock. Now clock is not in the sense of the round clock that we see. It is a pace. There's a certain pace to my state of mind now, just now. Each of us is experiencing a certain kind of pace. We have to identify and find out what is that pace. There are no numbers to that, there is no tempo to that. But this is just a pace we have to find out where you are in your truest self. For example, I am trying to give it a physiological indication of my pace now, for example. These are not regular intervals. This is my pace just now. If you try yourself, you will find that your pace is, your hands will do the job of showing you what's the pace. And they are not regular like the clock, they are very, very natural. Sometimes they may be regular, but that pace, now if I realize I'm speaking at a much higher pace than my real pace now. If I talk at my real pace, I'll say a few sentences. Let's see how it works out. We see a tiny flower bud gently trying to open itself. This is the pace. before that I was speaking, so many things at such a high speed. So this is my speed now. Okay. Now if I am pushed to be very fast, and my pace is at that, what I rendered some time ago, how do I reconcile these two different pressures? One is the natural pressure, I won't call it pressure, natural tempo, and the pressure from out or circumstantial. Let's engage, for example, imaginary conversation between you and me at very high speed, okay? You have this scheduled to, then after that you're going to play the composition, you'll go and record at the studio, and then you come back and then do the mixing, mastering and everything and all that. But no. Yes. We will do the mastering.
I saw problems.
We'll do the recording. We'll do everything today. So there was, when I woke up, the whole agenda was flashed in front of my eyes. Oh, this. Then when I cooled down, yes, maybe you are faster than the pace of that thing, what is coming. Maybe you are faster than the fire brigade who's going to complete its job. You don't know what clock you are on. But it is better to find out what clock I am. Very strange, I'll just tell you, it's Bombay. Okay. I come back home, it's a busy time. I get off the train station, come out, there's a taxi line, and I run to catch a taxi. There are lines of people wanting to catch cabs, Hey, I want to go there. No, I don't go there. Hey, I want to go there. No, I don't go there. Hey, I don't go there. No, I don't think I'll go there. Okay. Something was wrong with me. My pace was not correct. I slowed down a little bit. I said, I'll go to a random cab. Will you take me there? Please come. And I didn't expect to hear a fierce look. He was waiting for the next. They all want to go, don't want to go too far, because then again coming back fare becomes a problem. They don't want to go to the area where I wanted to go. So maybe it was a coincidence, but I felt that maybe I was clocking myself better than before and getting frustrated. And that frustration hit the other person and his frustration hit me. And we kind of could not resolve those two clocks. So it might be a sheer coincidence, but I tried this with other instances also, meetings, crucial meetings, critical issues. And when you are going to such meetings, the anxiety is so high, you want to really make your point at the first outset, and you want to get all your points scored, And sometimes the clock, you have to be lucky, but if you practice the clock enough, the clock comes and tells you, cool down, somebody else is going to do your job today. He will say something which supports your point, So you wait and find out what happens. There are different people in the group, each one has his own clock. Whose clock is matching with mine? It's not conspiratorial at all. It is purely energy, study of energy field. So coming back to music making, when we are on stage, we have a tabla player. If I am playing a sarangi solo concert, tabla player is there. You perhaps know that many times we go on stage without having seen the tabla player ever before. We just meet in the green rooms, check the tuning of the instruments and what piece you're going to play, at what speed, what tempo. Just check that and come on stage and start. Because the time cycles are known, the style of accompaniment is generally understood, but attitude is not known beforehand. The tabla player may come with a show-off attitude. I have the fire, I have all the ammunition with me, I'm going to show off today, Or he's a pulled back guy, you have to wake him up. Or this is, okay, medium, okay, it goes on, routines go on. The point is, if I understand my own clock before going onto stage, and I try to fathom his clock, then I begin to understand that what are his likes and dislikes in terms of music and time. And gradually I get into his mind level and bring him slowly to, they're all a matter of few seconds, bring him to my pace, and then it settles well. Sometimes attitudes are very good before getting on stage. After getting on stage, attitude can get complicated. Sometimes. Either by some people in the audience who provoke certain negative feelings, or then there is an overly enthusiastic audience which is also a disturbance. They really try to invade your space, a very enthusiastic audience, try to grab the artist's space. So that time an artist has to take care that his space is so sacred, even God can't enter there. So he has to come to that conviction that this is purely my space and space of my impulse is going to enact itself today. So then you bow down to all the good wishes, to all the elders and everything, but still, I need your good wishes. I wish to be true to my impulse while playing. And then handling the tabla player, or maybe the lights are too much, the parchment instrument. So the parchment tends to go awry, and the tuning with so many strings tend to go awry. That is time again to reclock ourselves on stage, stop the performance for a few seconds, find out which is the string that's not very happy, and tune that. Another very interesting thing that, of course, it's useful in the context of sarangi or the sarod.
Sorry, so you ever met the tabla player before when you perform?
There are instances.
So you studied the same composition before or no? Just improvising on the same?
No. I may do a very new composition which he may not have heard before. But the scansion is known. Scansion is known.
The what?
The scansion, like the time cycle, if it's a 16 beat cycle, we know where the beat number 1 arrives. Beat number 1 is the focal point. So the composition may start, normally it starts from 9th or the 12th beat, normal compositions. But I may take a composition from 7th or 8th beat. But the arrival at the beat number 1 has to be understood. Or sometimes purely on the stage you take up a rare composition starting from a very, very unusual point, and if the accompanist is very smart, intuitive, he gets it. That depends, that's where the caliber of an accompanist is measured, by his intuitive approach. Then of course we have the domain of using beats, half beats, quarter beats. I'm not at all exponent of those, but I know in South Indian music they have a lot of dealings with half beat, quarter beats, and some of the North Indian musicians percussionists have taken to that very well. And that's a very exciting domain, but sometimes it tends to go outside the domain of art. It becomes more arithmetic than art. But not to be criticized, that also forms, kept within limits, it's a form of art. I was saying something. Okay, yeah. The sarod and the sarangi, for example, they are parchment instruments. Now, before going on stage, I studied from 4 masters. My father, the tabla, the voice. Then I studied from Sagiruddin Khan, the sarangi. Then I studied from Dinkar Kaikini, vocal music again. And more importantly than that, the huge network of ragas and their subterranean nerve connections. It's an amazing world, amazing world. And then lastly from Ustad Ali Akbar Khan, the sarod maestro, who died a few years ago, was living in San Francisco. Last part of his life he lived in California. So I was playing a concert somewhere, and the first half of the concert I went with a particular mood. I'm going to play this rag. And I tuned my sarangi to this resonant strings to the rag which I thought of playing. And I went on stage, played, just didn't lift, the concert just went flat. Second half, after the intermission, I said, I did some blunder. I go backstage, hold my instrument in my arms and ask, what do you want me to play? I ask. Then how does the instrument? I used to keep strumming strings. And some of the strings, they shine, some of them don't shine. So I make out the ones who are shining, those are the notes wanted in the next raga. And then other notes, if I change the rag and find if they can also shine a little bit more, and then it suddenly just comes to life sometimes, some way, you know. And after the intermission, it was just took off from the word go. So the instrument, and they all sound like mumbo jumbo and shamanism and all that. But actually it is true, because what happens is that the instrument, the condition of the instrument tells you what notes will resonate very well. I come to know the same thing. Ustad Ali Akbar Khan, before the concert, people ask him, what rag will you play? Because Ali Akbar Khan playing concert means it's the concert of the century, kind of, you know. And you imagine he would prepare his mood for days together before a huge concert. No, he used to, whatever he did before going on stage, he said, I have to ask my instrument. So then I realized there's something true about it, that it is more than the instrument. You're asking yourself what state of mind your impulse is in, and not what your head is in. You know, so we may have, somebody has called and said, why don't you play this raga today? Some great musician or an admirer or somebody, and you immediately get triggered. You start sacking yourself to that rag. Come on, I'll do that. Meanwhile, the impulse has not been referred to. You know, I know a great vocalist. He died in 91. Great vocalist, a descendant of a very, very powerful tradition. Before going on stage, he wanted to sing a rag which is not considered by the high priests as very high class raga, by the high priests I mean. But that raga was a romantic raga, and this person was a really romantic person. He wanted to sing that. And you know what he said before going on stage? You know, Dhruba, he's much, almost my father's age. He said, Dhruba, you know, I was accompanying him on sarangi. You know, I feel like singing this rag, but my tradition won't allow me. I have to sing one of the elite ragas. And he sang that elite rag. It didn't gel, you know. I should have listened to my heart and sung that other rag, you know. So it is a great, very honest communication from a great master, you know. So these things also influence, social influences play a big role in our choice of material, in the choice of timing, all that. So the idea of tuning the clock of myself and the player. Now if I am a composer, for example, or I am a player in a composer's work, like what is happening here. If the scheduling allowed us, in an ideal situation I am talking of, where we could sit with the composer for at least a half an hour or 45 minutes before. The music, suppose I'm assuming that I could read the staff. Okay, that's a foregone conclusion. And then can we meet for half an hour, 45 minutes, and see what's your clock in the piece which what you wrote? Where is the clock in that piece? And if I get it, then you will not have to tell me too much to how to express your concept, you know. Vice versa, if as a composer you can see my clock in those 45 minutes, then you may ask me to do some things to reinforce that idea which is there in the written piece, or you might alter it and say, I think you played that way. Your clock is better off that way. So we make a little modification here and all that. So this is one of these one-to-one instances where there are other musicians in the ensemble. It requires a lot of power to synchronize with all the minds, all the different clocks, you know, on the day. But I'm talking of an ideal situation, and here I come to an instance of some masters who come on stage and they immediately galvanize the audience. It's just as if they are in his grip or her grip. So the person, even before starting the tuning, the notes and all that, just coming on stage and it's... So what is it? That there is a kind of a huge powerhouse they have built within themselves. So that, I'm sure composers, because you are so much in touch with your real impulse. I too have done compositions, one of which I will discuss at some other occasion with the Ensemble Modern of Frankfurt. We played that in House of World Culture in Berlin. That was again to do with real time. And there are 7 musicians, and we'll come to that later. So, if composers are in touch with real time, And I'm sure you are. That's how the piece was born. And if within those few minutes, assuming can we compress the 45 minutes into few minutes and radiate those energies from your transmitters, you tell me, even without using words, tell me these vibes. If I'm awake, I'll receive your waves, So this would perhaps lead to, like sometimes you have a great conductor conducting a symphony, and his personality has brought all the musicians to the piece has just lifted itself. The same conductor then on another day may not be in that right energy field, and the piece doesn't, the concert doesn't go that way. So it's a question of building up a powerhouse, both from the composers and the player's point of view. So I'm treading into domain of, by starting the topic of tuning the clock, domain of non-spoken communication. This is a very powerful communication because on stage when we are playing our music, in spite of so many cliches, millions of cliches in any rag, and you can't wriggle out of it, you have to use the cliches and say, can I just pass through your door, So in spite of having such a crowd of tools, cloud of material, and crowd of compulsorily to be used material, how do we make our statement? So it really calls for a lot of genuine power from our innermost core. So that is using our psychic powers to bring the central thought of the rag to a point before starting the recital, and then releasing that energy. So this kind of mental build-up, mental exercise, which I feel is the call of the day, because more and more we are realizing how futile it is, the limitations of words, limitation of other material, limitation of electronic communications. That we have to go back to go forward rather, to the mental communication between ourselves and be prepared for the theory of probability to work itself out, maybe favorably, may not be favorably. But like we go on stage, there is no guarantee that the concert will be a success. There is no guarantee. It may very well built up event, there is no guarantee, because it's all the moment which rules. So which challenges us enormously. And therefore after a concert, what happens is we wish to hide somewhere. I just don't want to meet anybody, not out of arrogance or anything, but just that the power is so big to hold, so enormous. You feel like looking for a mummy and hiding in her lap, Can I hide there? That's the kind of feeling. In the cosmos, you want to go back there. And I've seen this great master I was telling you about, Ali Akbar Khan. To some extent, he was known for his fondness for whiskey. After a concert, he said a beautiful thing, He said, you know why I drink? He used to have a huge glass, only this much of whiskey, and full of soda. It looked like a huge glass. People say, oh, he drinks so many glasses. No, he's just drinking this much. But he used to say, you know why I drink? People drink to go high, I drink to come down. It's so difficult to come back to the ground after that, And his concerts were so strange. You should look up his concerts on YouTube. Ali Akbar Khan. There's a famous expression in our culture about his music. You go to 10 concerts of his and they are disasters. And the 11th one makes you forget all other musicians, and including his disasters. But if you look closely to his disaster concerts, apparently disaster concerts, you'll find that everywhere he's trying to synchronize with his real impulse, original impulse. And this impulse is itself putting him into a great challenge, that my impulse shifts every few seconds. What is he to do? But he himself gets overawed by his own impulse, And then it begins to look chaotic. But if you look from a very closely deep microscopic look, you will find that they are all connected. There is no chaos. It's connected. But for the apparent mind who is used to the typical way of linearity in expression, we flow with one phrase, then phrase. It's very, very linear type of music, you know. Please.
Do you think that the audience is also communicated in a non-words way with the musician on stage? Does the audience have some influence on the inner impulse of the musician?
Yes. In fact, there is communication and there is influence. Audience influences very much the artist. This is where the difficulty begins. You know?
But should the musician exclude this influence or go for it or communicate with it?
It is not black and white.
No.
Yeah. The artist has to choose how much of the energy I use from the audience.
So you could say if it's a bad concert, well, maybe it was a bad audience.
Yeah, exactly. Things could happen, you know. I know one of his concerts I attended when I went to learn from him in California. He was playing in Davis. And he played a 2.5 hour concert, which is very unusual. He would play 1 hour concert, one and quarter, a break, pause, and then the second half. He played 2.5 hours. And after concert, immediately I rushed backstage to say it was a wonderful thing. No, it was the worst concert in my life. He said that. So he was unsynchronized with I mean, not. I'm saying something wrong. No, his pace was too fast. The clock was too fast, and his physiological expression to that could not perhaps match up to the clock, you know. But in spite of that, not that every time the clock he's missing the clock. There were points where he was hitting the clock, you know. They're great moments. But it depends. And if you see musicians like Ali Akbar Khan or a great vocalist, Ustad Amir Khan, vocalist. He was a great innovator. So these two masters I've seen when they are on stage. My uncle Panalal Ghosh, who brought the bamboo flute to the concert level, Bansuri. So when they were on stage, their eyes closed by themselves, you know, and they were in deep meditation while performing. And the audience also got involved with their music, invariably. And it is said that if any of these people were playing at any festival, it was difficult for any other artist after them to take his performance high, because this was kind of a very cosmic experience. But coming back to the point of the audience vibrations, audience field, coming in and supporting or intruding into the artist's space.
Yeah.
So the artist has to be powerful enough to decide how much to take or to reject, or for the initial part, keep it away, let my space get established, and then I allow maybe in a half an hour, 45 minutes time, an hour's time, or maybe post-intervention. Then I allow the power to come once I have established my space. So different choices we have to make. Sometimes it's from the word go. You're also high, the audience is also high. You know, click. It's a spot judgment.
I had a question of things before. It is about the teachers. You told us the masters popping out when you free yourself and from what you've learned. How would the ideal teacher be? Would he consciously from the start avoid that situation to establish? I mean, if I'm a teacher, I of course don't want that the student wants to get rid of me totally. I want him to have benefit from the lesson.
Yeah,
So should a teacher always step back and go back to that point that he just sits there and say, now it's your turn?
True. It's not the teacher's point, it is the student's point.
Yeah.
how much of the teacher he assimilates
Yes.
and how much of it he fears.
Mm.
Because we are always looking for teachers' approval,
Yes.
whatever we do. So the approval machinery, the approval mechanics,
Mm.
that can sometimes go awry.
Yeah.
And if I'm doing something, I'm scared that my teacher will really disapprove of that. And someday teacher will say, it's a brilliant thing that you did, you know. Like I was teaching a student, a child of 7 or 8, one phrase, I'll just sing that phrase. Shama Sanga Shama Sanga Hori. I sang that.
Yeah.
Shama Sanga Hori. And she was singing Shama Sanga Hori. And no, it's not that. Sing this. Shama Sanga Hori. Shama Sanga Hori. She sang Shama Sanga Hori. I was so fortunate. I said, telling myself, you idiot, why don't you halt and listen to her? She's giving you a brilliant piece. And from that day I rejected my piece, and that was the phrase I was playing and singing. So she simplified the entire complexity of that with a very emotional turn. Shama Sanga Hori. Very nicely done. So these are the things, that, and she was getting more scared that she would be, in full class, what would be condition. So that's what I'm saying, that before a concert, we have lots of ghosts coming up. Unknown, unseen, of known people. Known people's unseen ghosts. They come up before a concert and they plague us like hell. So the contact with real time helps us to come to our real state of mind, And when you are in the real state of mind in real time, many of the veneers which we accumulate over our memory, over emotions, over years, those veneers gradually begin to wear off and they fall away. It's very important for coming to terms with your own creativity, your own artistry, your intellectual height, aesthetic sensibility. It's very important to come to terms with our talents, our genius. So each one is a genius, and different ratios they are suppressed either by outside or by ourselves, or mutated. So many things happen. So real time really helps us to develop a courage to see the genius in us. And I mean, one of my students, she's a European, a Dutch lady. She was learning sarangi. We tried this real time thing with the bow. For example, if I have to play the note, I would start from here. Like impulse says stop. Impulse says start. Stop. Normally, with such a small part of the bow left remaining, I would prefer to take a new bow and start with new energy. We would never generally use the last part of the bow because the energy is so less. But if the impulse says to stop and says start again, till I get a stable sound in this last part, no matter the volume, but the mind becomes stable. So I'm just following my impulse at this point. So she tried doing that, and she really said next day that I felt I was sitting on a huge power plant. So much of energy is there, almost doesn't finish, supplies energy. So I guess the real time connects us with our very fundamental energy of existence, which is unpredictable and endless. We also have, when I said spontaneity and improvisation, masters who are, as I said, Thirakwa, tabla playing is more repertory based, but in a melodic recital you will have repertory. And there are masters who sing repertories, it's kind of recitals, they recite the entire repertory, which sounds very good because it's very well constructed, very carefully built up, a lot of attention. It's a wonderful piece of mosaic, and you admire it for that. Then somebody comes with an abstraction of that mosaic and makes a small concert with a simple few lines, and that immediately touches the soul. Like invariably when we classical musicians, my father used to say, all classical musicians have to experience folk music for a good deal of time in their life. That's where your energy comes from, how they connect to the energy which is given to us by nature. Continually nature is giving us. Go back to the boatman, go back to the farmer, and listen to their music. And you will find if you can touch those levels at which they sing, and you bring that into yourself, you will find your classicism acquires a kind of spiritual power. Otherwise it is very learned, you learned how to handle power, but it is not spiritual power. So, repertory, to the point that it does not interfere with spontaneity, again calls for a lot of discretion on the part of the singer or player. Because spontaneity will use repertory, will use memory, and as I said in the beginning, it may keep some of it, it may use very indirectly some of it, or it may reject everything altogether. So it's a decision of the artist while he remains within the rules of the rag. It is his artistic decision, and very few can do it because they have built up that power. But it is possible, what I am trying to say, it's very much humanly possible on a daily level to come in contact with that spontaneity.
I wonder whether you could say something about, it's something I've experienced in performance. You know, I'm a performer, not only a composer. And it also occurs in real life too. But it's this, you're into a song, especially when I'm singing, let's say, and you feel a tremendous emotion. All of a sudden you want to cry or something like that, and you're losing it. Because you're losing touch with the performance, you're losing touch with communicating the emotion, rather you're starting to get drowned in it, or it's taking you away from that real time, that focus. What can we say about that sort of thing and how to deal with it?
It does happen. It does happen. And I could only help myself by pulling back, pausing for a few seconds, and trying to find out what is going on really. You know. But it is all intuitive level. Analytical mind will not give me an answer. There's too much information to process. So I have to go with my intuitive mind and try to approach what is my truth in the whole thing. Assuming I'm playing your piece, what is my truth in that piece? You get my point?
Yeah.
It's an ensemble which is playing your piece, and I'm playing Alacrity in Vancouver, and I'm playing parts wherever I'm supposed to play. But if I can relate very well to your idea and connect that with my real time, then I can bring a lot of sanity to this whole thing. Otherwise it can become musically insane. As you
Of
say.
course. We know that.
I must also tell you that while Indian music is called largely improvisation, it is not true. If there was a computer to decipher all the phrases sung in a performance, you would find that the artist has played those phrases a number of times before, or others have played those phrases a number of times before. So what is it that really is improvising? Is he using the same material, juxtaposing them, turning them differently, or dynamics are different, or what? Or if none of these, then what is he doing that is new? So improvisation, the term is used in contrast to notated music. It looks as improvisation. But in the truest sense of the word improvisation, it is not improvisation, it is recreation. We are recreating many of the things which we did in the past and bringing them up. But within improvisation, if you can be spontaneous, if you can touch the moment of spontaneity, then that makes all the sense to the word. It even gives legitimacy to the idea of improvisation. Otherwise, to me, improvisation is not a legitimate term, because it is really recreating many of the things. What's the time situation like? I think 5 minutes more.
Yeah, something like that.
You sing a little bit? Very common starting phrase for the singers. So it while we'll utter the solfege as re ni sa, but actually you are singing sa re ni sa. Now try to bring down the volume. Little tremolo. Mora, mora, mora,